Hey, well, welcome to the Dream Labs at Dr. Contrast Live. I just thought I'd take a moment here and just a bit of a brief explanation before I start here today. I really regret not being able to go live last Thursday. My wife had a series of appointments she had to take care of, and I had to make sure that I was part of that process. So my apologies for not being part of the process last Thursday. But again, we're here today, and I'm really glad to be back live streaming. And I think it'd be interesting today. I thought we'd kind of look into some architectural project studies, and I think in this case you'll notice I've got a little bit of thumbnail sketch here started, and prior to going into showing you what the project was all about, this is a piece I did some time ago for a high school system looking at a whole new campus. I thought I'd bring that along and let you see the development of how that whole thing came together from the actual conception of us getting the architectural record drawings and then into some conceptual work. And then, hey, Shadow, how are you, man? Good to have you on board, Doctor. It's good to be. It's nice to see you on a bit of a different day for you, but I'm glad you're back with us. So thanks so much for tuning in. Great to have you on board. Excellent. Really appreciate it, Shadow. You've done some great work for me, and I cannot thank you enough for the absolute association with a real pro. Thanks very much, Shadow. Good to have you on board. But again, back to the premise. I thought, before I go into anything as far as what the project might have entailed, or what should show you some of the sketches, I think there's a little clue here I think it'd be interesting to kind of start with for this whole architectural project studies, and it goes back to the concept base. And this might be a bit of an overview, but for some of you who are working in architectural systems, I think it's really interesting that to bring several points of interest together here. In the architectural world, which is one of my fascinating subject matters, I mean, I'm really, I'm amazed at how much I really enjoy doing architectural work for clients, whether it's a big or small, residential, corporate, whatever it might be in the past. It's really been a lot of fun to deal with a whole different science. And as I said before in some earlier streams, the technology base of the architectural systems, materials, fabrication systems, and what the capabilities are just absolutely beyond this world. They're really, really, truly infinite. But I'm going to take it back a bit here for just a moment and bring into light here, into forefront, a name that maybe you're not familiar with, but I think maybe hopefully you should be. And this name is Marco Nobili. Marco Nobili was my drawing and rendering instructor back at the Center for Creative Studies in Architectural Rendering Systems. Now, it seems like a very common Italian name. He was a very, very suave Italian gentleman, extremely incredible acclaim, very well founded, extremely talented and prolific individual. But his claim to fame, he was a chief architect for none other than Prince Renier of Monaco. Most of the things he did with that principality were his tasking. Phenomenal, talented individual, great model builder, extremely lucid individual. But I think one of the things that I really respected about his whole program and the teaching process that I had him for all 4 years at CCS was the idea of being able to see an elevation or a plan drawing or whatever it might be and turn it into a platform and develop basic shapes in architecture and begin to move those shapes around and manipulate them and massage them into newness and certain, for lack of another better term here, platform studies or building architectural studies or modules that could begin to develop a whole new precept of thinking. So I'm going to start here with a little show you some of his exercise he showed us. If you take a basic elevation like this, for example, we don't know what the circumstance is. It how deep is it? How tall is it? Give it a sense of scale. But he always thought in terms of going into no matter what the project or subject matter was, get that elevation down. Begin to look at the drawing from the point of view of just a very simple, no perspective involved. What are the modules telling you? What are the building blocks telling you about this whole process here? Then he'd take that whole idea and begin to move into, he would show a demonstration, for example, how to take that elevation into a plan form or into a perspective, whether it was low eye level or high level or an overview or a bird's eye view. Just really gifted at doing this. And his whole premise was simply this: develop the platform first. Now I'm going to show you what I mean by that. What he meant by that is, if you look at this upper elevation, this real quick little study here, this is all conceptual, by the way. It's not the physical world yet, but it's just conceptual, trying to get the principle across how to see certain things, how to develop certain things when you begin to move in architectural processing and getting into newness and making sure that the facilitation is accurate from the elevation that you're seeing. So what he would do is take this, and notice this is elevation from here to here. There's a certain span, but there's a fracture point right here. It's actually a shed system, so it's a shed architectural piece and a contemporary piece of architecture. Let's label it as that. So what he would do is begin to take down below here. Now you set up a platform, perspective grid, for example, vanishing point, vanishing 2-point perspective, where this thing will open up a little bit. But he developed a platform by doing this. This would represent this area right here. would represent the overall span of that elevation up on top. Then you look at the certain fracture point. In other words, the fracture point was this one right here. So you lay that in there and you do that. That's my point of departure. Then he looked at the upper and the right-hand module and the left-hand module of the shed system itself and begin to move into this. Now, you take that first angle and begin to move this whole process, and by doing the following, he come up to this. Then you kind of mirror that with this. Come off of that basic platform and then pick up that same perspective line. Notice he'd extend that a little bit, since that's what the form is doing. And overhang, there's my overhang right there. That comes right back down. Notice there was an angle of return here. So if we went right there, you'd actually see this. You'd cut that back right away. You've got that left-hand module kind of blocked in terms of what the scale is doing. Now to go to the right-hand side, same thing. Here's my fracture point here, which is right here. Take that same elevation, about the same slope, bring it right up. Bring it right up. Notice there's a bit of an overhang on it again, and again, just come right back to almost square. Look at how you begin to build that module based on the uniqueness of getting that elevation down and using, hey, Victor, how are you? Good to have you on board, man. Just got to start a little explanation here on some architectural stuff. And if you missed a little bit of it, this is kind of an explanation about, I'm going to show you eventually a project I worked on in a school system that was really interesting. It looks like American Embassy in Abu Dhabi. Yeah, well, I hope that'd be kind of cool. But I started, before I get in and show you the project I'm working, I had worked on, I'm going to describe it a little bit. And I saw that yeah, I saw that one. Not that I know. Hey, that's interesting. But I think there's an individual in my career at school at CCS was an absolute brilliant technician. His name was Marco Nobili, very well-established Italian architect, incredible international fame, and he was my instructor at CCS for all 4 years. And the great thing about Marco was that his claim to fame was he did all the work under the surname of the House of Garibaldi, which is Monaco, Prince Inge of Monaco. Phenomenal talent, pretty cool. So what he taught us to see in architectural systems, instead of going to a guessing at what the architecture or the process or building would look like or structure would become or look like, he broke it down in elevations and plan forms and platforms and begin to see how things work. So I did just, before I show you the project, I thought that was interesting to go back and show you all, if you're listening and attending here, what that meant. Here's an elevation study, just a conceptual piece. But he'd break that down into, okay, now you've got the elevation. See what the modules are doing, 1 to 2. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different modules here. Break it down into a very simplest format. And notice there's a fracture point here. So what he would teach us is see the module, then begin to put a platform in place. And what I've done here is this line underneath here represents the perspective platform of that span from there to there. That's all it is, just a flat surface. Then he told us, look at the fracture point. There's one here and here. So let's get that left-hand module in by coming off that platform and up an angle. Notice the fracture there, bring it back, right back down the ground line, which is right there. Same with this. There's a fracture point here. Now it begins up at the same slope. Bring that up. And again, notice the overhang to here, bring it back, and then notice it's almost vertical, right where you've got here. So you bring that down to vertical, and then all of a sudden, look at that. You've got it. That's interesting how that all comes together. Now notice there's another fracture point here. So you end it there. Now does that go through? I don't know. We're going to find out in a moment. Look at how simple that becomes in terms of breaking things down into modular components that begin a truthful story in architectural studies. And let me fast forward a little bit here. When I work with architectural firms and have worked with them in the past, one of the most dreadful things you can do is come in and say, well, I think this is okay. Gee, I hope it's right. You better not even begin to state that. You're dead. What you want to walk into an architect, you look at developers who've got people, investors lined up to get this building done, they're looking for truth and wholesomeness in your conversation with what they see, which is what I'll show you in a moment with the school project that worked out. So let's go back to this drawing, just to give you a little bit of history on it, how it all comes together. Now that you have that, I can start to, what is this guy doing? Is that an element plane? Now notice this little side, now that barrier comes off about halfway down here, so that comes out here. I'm going to work in this little guy right here. That comes out and it stays just beyond that shed. So I'm going to have to cheat the paper here just a bit. It comes out to ground line. And there's my, is that a little walkway? Let's call it that. Let's call it a little walkway. So let's put a little bit of substance on this roof here. So there we are. That's that piece right there. Now, what is this guy doing? Does that form come off of this line here? If I bring this in, is this like a tower that comes off? Let's say it's a tower that comes off that shape. Let's do this in perspective. Look at the width. Let's look at that in perspective. Let's bring that up. And let's do this. Look at the angle. Again, we're going to see it in perspective a little bit. It's going to kind of interfere. Hey, Demetrius, how are you? Looking good, man. Is online as well. Super, very cool. So let's get that point, which is now here, and that point, which is here, and put the angle in place. Now, what does that do? Does that come off the building? Does it come off like so? Does it have some substance? If it does, let's just drive it back in space. Let's give it some real guts. Let's say this comes in and does this, and wraps over the top of that surface and does that. Look how that begins to alter exactly what that shape is doing. And you've got it right there, and seeing how to begin to modulate these things and how to visualize it in your mind's eye. And I think one of the things, let me go back just for a moment here too. One of the most magnificent things he taught us was to be almost three-dimensional in the third dimension with our sight pattern. When you see this, you automatically see space. You see infinite space. He was a genius at that. And he taught us how to take basic forms and shapes and begin to manipulate them in the third dimension so we can begin to transfer them on paper successfully. So let me go ahead here just for a moment. Let's break this thing down. Now that we have this and we have this, a little bit of support count. Let's do the same thing at this end. Let's make that a solid piece. Let's drop that down, put this back in perspective. Now let's begin to move into this thing. Why don't we do this? Let's break this down, and break that down. We're going to drop into this guy. Basic components, draw through it, draw through it, draw through it. And we're going to miss a little bit of the angle back here because it gets pretty shallow. Let's go back in and say this. Let's come up and break this shape up now. Now that I've got the components in place, look how we can begin to move this shape around and begin to manipulate it to no end. It's just absolutely amazing. While I'm at it here, let's do this. Let's come back out to this. There's the entryway, let's say, this basic entryway. But in that entryway, there's another element here that we're going to put on the ground plane that has this. And maybe it comes back in and begins to pick up a line here. Now we can put the environment around this thing. Let's do this. Let's come back out here in perspective again. Notice that's my drive line. Bring this out in perspective and begin to hit that contact point. Draw right through that. That's what I want to shoot for, upside down. Hit that same sweep and right back into. Now that could be just, that's the forefront. Look at that, how that whole thing comes together so smoothly. Lousy sketch, but the principle I'm trying to get across is, when you're working with a form such as this, and no matter how simple or complex they are, use that elevation as a modular building block. What's its overall plan form? What does it look like in perspective? How do I maneuver this thing? Now let's go back to this, and all these things begin to produce one thing and one thing only: successful concept illustration work. Let's kind of break the shape down a little bit more, and I'll get out of it here. Let's take this down. Let's come right back down to center line. Back to center line. Now let's go back in through here. And again, let's take this guy, break it up again. Does that become a sidewalk? Maybe. Take that through, end it there. This could be a green space of some sort. So you want to come back in and give it a softscape character. Just laying in some shrubbery here, right around that little portion. Go circular first, build the module first in terms of organic shapes. Stop it right there. Look at how all of a sudden that whole thing is starting to take on some really neat personality. It's not a great sketch, but I'm just trying to illustrate what happens when you move into the understanding how to work with a module. Now let's do this. Let's sneak in there. Ah, look at that. That little trick. Well, let me stop for a moment. What I think is really fascinating about this whole creative process is this. You've got a given elevation, you've got a given site plan to work with, you've already developed a third dimensional model in your mind, and you're beginning to translate that on paper. But isn't it fascinating to me, and maybe hopefully to you as well, that what happens once you start this thing, now let's do this. From there, I've opened that whole thing. This is now breaking down. That breaks down. But in addition to that, it's got a pillar to it, pillar here and a pillar there, but it goes right through the building. So now, how am I going to show that? Simple, light source. Drop the shadow in. That tells me that recesses. Now let's go back and do this. Now that I've got some flexibility here, I can take this right on through and have a lot of fun with the fact that there's a limit line here. Let's go back and put some pavers in this thing. Take that into that. Maybe this has another location here where it has a certain, maybe it's a fountain of some sort that has an elevation to it. So you build out of that. And then there's a sculptural piece that sits on top of that thing. Just kind of lets you know where the entrance of the building is. It just takes on a whole different, all of a sudden you've got this personality, concrete, glass, and grass, each providing their own personalities, working in unison, along with the sky and its color variability. Yeah, you're right, Victoria, well stated. It all works together. It all becomes a harmony of just geometric solids and the like. It's terrific to work with. So let me go back into this now for a second. Let's break this shape up just a bit, just to show you all the, now that I've got the architecture down, what I want to stress here is now that I've gotten the module put together, I can begin to really become lucid with it and create with it and take it from a very simple static platform into a very interesting, intriguing building section. Really neat stuff to work with it. Now let's do this. Let's have fun with this upper piece. We won't see this side, but let's do this. Let's break this down. This is all glass. That becomes a glass pane. Look, all of a sudden, to me, it's fascinating. Sorry, I hate to be redundant, but it's just fascinating. Now, let's go back and step this down a little bit, step it in. Let's step that a little bit right down to this roof line. Do the same thing here. There it is. There it is. That becomes glass. Now we break this up. Now, all of a sudden, personality, character, beginning to reveal about this building. Let's go back a little further here. Take this side, run that through. Let's take this and be a little sneaky, just drop this in. Maybe there's a recess in here. Let's get that same shadow to work. And again, glass, find the center, break it up, break it up. And again, maybe this is a typical split. Again, look at, from that simple banded elevation with 2, 5, maybe 6 modules being involved in it, you begin to create this whole unit inside this thing. It's just absolutely amazing. So let's go back in and break this up. Let's have a little fun with this thing. Let's go back in, take that line right through. And let's do the same thing with this. Maybe that now does the same thing. It steps back just a bit and does that. Now you have this, same thing, shadow drop, indicating a recess, into this, into this, into this. And man, right away, I mean, that thing has got so much personality now, it's just taking it away from being a very static set of modules or geometric shapes into a very, hopefully, an interesting romantic piece of architecture that tells a story. Let's go back to this side just for a moment. Let's take that right through. Let's put that little bit of a break in here, and let's let this become, again, take that glass line through, and just enough partition right there to give us a little bit of glass on the far end of the building. So I think it's coming together here in terms of how dramatic this whole process of beginning to think through the process and begin to develop shape and create the third dimension from a very simple elevation with no perspective whatsoever. And as I said earlier on in the stream, I think a really important thing to remember about this entire process is simply this: that when you see an elevation like this, well, let me put another context here. I've been trained to think in terms of when I see an elevation or a plan view, right away I'm beginning to develop that third dimensional vision of what this thing might look like. And once I see that, I begin to break it down into modules. What are the proportions? What are the modules? How many units are in there? How do I build this? What's the scale? What's the elevation size and all this stuff? So let's go back in it for a moment. I'll just kind of wrap this sketch up. And thank you for the patience of the banter here. Let's put a little structure in the surface here. Let's come back in and put a little bit of this into it. Let's band that down. Let's do the same thing out here. Maybe this has a little bit of a different rhythm. 1, 2, 3. We come back in and begin to put something here, here, and here. Let's bring this up, and just maybe it curls back just enough for there's a little bit of a radius right here. That's a little bit of a promenade here. Now, because of the light source, we'll have a little bit of this in shadow, and again this in shadow, the overhang. And again, same thing here on the ground plane. There it is, up the center line, right on through. It's got to put a little bit of texture in this thing. Again here. What I think is also intriguing about the perspective process is this, that when you begin to understand and develop the process of getting these monitors to work and transferring the elevation into a perspective platform, what amazes me is how light source will really begin to develop and embellish what you're seeing. So all of this, you're right, Victoria, that's a great comment you made here about concrete, glass, and glass, each providing their own each has its own personality. But also, light is the one element there that you might want to add, Victoria, that light, along with the sky and its color variables, it all pulls together. And I think that's a great way to summarize this whole thing. It all comes together based on these elements that we can control once we understand them, once you move into it. And I think that's just an incredible, great observation, Victoria. Thank you. You helped this guy take my confusion right out of it. Shadow for sure. Yeah, incredible. That whole contrast phenomenon, dark against light. It's the old Da Vinci process, and again, the Rembrandt process. Darkest darks next to lightest lights. Interesting. So who? That would be Rembrandt or Da Vinci, one of the two. Yeah, very cool. So here we are, gang. Let's go back in there and just kind of pick up some pieces as we go here. Let's kind of just band this out for what it's worth. We're going to create some texture in this thing. And again, over here, you want to take this piece and give a little bit more character to it. Kind of round that in. Take that through. And again, so interesting. And then here's Causeway here, into the roundabout, into the entranceway. And then last but not least, just to give a little bit of presence here, we'll come back in behind this thing. Just give it a little bit of this. And right away, you've got a very simple pen study that tells a story to a developer or an architect that I work with all the time. And I'm amazed, I should say this, I say this respectfully, so please don't misunderstand the context. A lot of the architects and individuals and the developers and builders I work with, and currently and hopefully I still work with, they're not really tuned into what the whole concept might look like, or what the elevation drawing, the plan view drawings, or the detail drawings are telling them. I'll tell you a story at some point in time in the future about working with Frank Gehry at the Law Building up in Cleveland. It was really astounding, and I won't take the time now to tell you the story, but it's so typical of how these guys think. But what's all the more reason, for example, when you put together these sketches, to be very meticulous about what you see, how you present it, and I'll tell you, the best presentation that I've ever made has been silent. And I'm going to say that again. The best presentation I have ever made, and we will all learn to make, is silent. Let your work do your speaking for you. That's what the whole thing is all about. It comes down to that you should not be in a case of trying to justify or defend what you see. If you're right, you're right. If you're wrong, guess what? You're wrong. You can't misspell it. So here we are. There it is. Just a nice little dissertation on what happens when you begin to get into these architectural systems, whether they're very complicated or very simple. Three things to learn from it, hopefully, from my point of view. What I've learned from it, anyway, let's put it this way. Simply this. Number one, when you see an elevation, break it down into modules. What are the contents? How many pieces are there? Give it a sense of scale and begin to imagineer what it is in your mind's eye in the third dimension. Take the elevation with no perspective, create in your mind the elevation into a third dimension, and then begin to put it into a platform where you begin to use contact points. For example, this one became a real station point for that fracture break right there. And then all of a sudden there and there, right hand, left hand, and it became a fracture break to teach us and to help us guide the form. There's a simple little sketch to get it done there. So I hope that helped at all. I wanted to start this program today, the stream today, without jumping in and saying, well, here's a project I worked on. I think it might be helpful to kind of detail a little bit and show you how this whole thing came about. So the sketches I'm going to show you now, let me just kind of switch gears here for a moment. Unless you have any questions, Victoria, Shadow, Demetrius, any questions at all or any opinions? Before I move on here, I really appreciate your being involved in the process here, gang. Experiment, that's the worst that happens. You fail. You never truly fail, you learn. Yeah, that's exactly right, Victoria. You always learn, no doubt about it. Super stuff. Very helpful, Victor. I'm so pleased you're on board today. I hope you're doing well. It's always fun to have you on board because you kind of fire darts at it. And that's what it's all about. It's neat stuff. Same with you, Shadow. So, Demetrius, how you doing? Good? Is this making sense for you? I mean, I went through it very quickly here, but I think when I go through this whole little dissertation on the project I'm going to show you, I'll repeat some of the things we've done here throughout the course of the afternoon here. So, there's an intro. This is how it all begins. So let's kind of switch gears here and I'll show you some physical sketches here. This was done for a high school program that was interested in looking at a whole new way. Would you add a shadow to the left side? No, I would not. You're talking about, let me move this out of the way here for a moment. You're talking about this left side over on the left-hand side over here. You're talking about underneath the canopy? Are you saying this, for example? Nail that down. I would take it that far, Demetrius, if that helps to answer your question. Yeah, I'd move that out of the way. There you go. That helps. Thank you very much. But I thought you were meaning, for example, outside the envelope of the architecture, I wouldn't put the shadow on the ground. I'd let some of the color and some of the fabrication work take care of that as well. So, hey, very good. Good insight, Demetrius. Thanks for bringing that up. So let's go back to this program here, and I'll just be really quick and run through this, not to bore you to death. But it came about several years ago, not quite that bad, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I was approached by a good friend to say, hey, we're going to do an expansion program with this high school. We'd let Debbie help us provide some conceptual work on what we want to do with this thing. And we're not quite sure whether it's going to be just a facelift of the building or a certain modular change or a whole new campus we want to add on either behind the building or to the right or left. So I'm going to walk you through some sketches here that I put together. This is a portion of the sketches. I just selected some of them out for our conversation today, so you can look at it and see what it might be all about. This is a primary entrance thing that was really concerning them. There's a lot of real estate out front, all the way around the building. There's some additional campuses behind it with a lot of space available in the area here, but they really wanted to attack this whole new, very bland, kind of an ineffective, uninviting entryway piece that they wanted to deal with first. And then as I go through this, I'll begin to illustrate or highlight. As a result of doing the entryway sketches, they said, hey, what if we did? Hey, what if we did? And all of a sudden it began to expand, which is what you want to really develop or generate with your client base. It's the idea of solving one problem, but yet opening up the door for the revelation of other things to be done, which I think is extremely critical, because once you start to see this thing unfold, especially in this case, or the administrators begin to say, the entryway is neat, but it needs to have a building to match it or a certain structure around it to kind of give it the same flavor. So this is where we attacked it first, and I'll come back to that in a few moments here. But the entryway was a two-door system, and they wanted to really open it up, become a little more melodic in terms of being much more inviting. So let's go back. There's the first sketch, a family of sketches I began to develop. Notice, working in the plan view first, looking at this, I mean, we really modified this whole thing. All of this is happening ahead of this line here. This portion here is the actual termination of the actual entryway. So we took the sketches you'll start to see now are ahead of this, moving it out front to give it a whole new presence and add some more mystery to the actual building process itself. So pardon me as I move these out of the way so we can see them. So I started with a plan view study first, just putting together some elements and looking at it. Then move that plan view. Notice I just demonstrated that. In the plan view, begin to see the modules going through and begin to create that third dimension, and then all of a sudden transfer that from the plan view into a little thumbnail sketch of what it might look like at normal eye level. So that's what this begins to look like as you move through. Notice the shed system coming through here and opening it all up. And another variation on the theme, adding some little spine work on top of all that. So I'm taking some liberties from the official first start at it to really kind of open up some things here. This is all entryway material, so bear with me. There's a whole series of pencil sketches here, ballpoint pen sketches. And I love working with ballpoint pen because you can do some neat stuff with tone, quality, line weight, and so forth. And it's a difficult medium. Well, let me rephrase that. Some feel that's a very difficult medium to work with because, once it's done, you can't erase it. That's the magic of it. Do not erase it. Let those accents become part of the design process. So here we go. There's the first sketch here, and my hands are squared away. I'm going to move this, move this out of the way. First set of thumbnails, same thing again. Now notice taking that same set and looking at, for example, from there, let's do this, so I can get this to work on the screen. From that plan view study into some little concept sketches and opening it up in a perspective. So what does that begin to look like if I change the character a little bit and move it around and modulate it. Now notice this is now becomes the entryway, but it's a whole different set of circumstances. So one thing feeds another. As you well know, Victoria, once and Demetrius and Shadow, once you go through one theme, all of a sudden you'll see something and switch it maybe a full 180 or 200 degrees change or shift, and all of a sudden it opens up a whole new fresh look at what you're trying to achieve. So that was the first one we were done with. Let's get that out of the way. Let's put it over here. The second variation on theme, just again, real quick pencil sketches or pen sketches on module changes. Just a little bit of a plan view based on this guy. Do I want that to be very contained? Do I want to actually modulate so where the elevation changes here as it goes up? It kind of this last piece here might lift a little bit more so than the other two forms around it. And again, an elevation study based on what we're seeing here. So there's another two. Let's go back and get into the third study here. Let's do this. Probably going to get these organized in the proper mesh. And here we go. Now a little bit of an overhead. Now really changing into a different flow. You taught me that. Turn it on its side, flip it around, and then flip it, and all of a sudden it opens up a whole new set of circumstances. And while I'm at it, this sketch here became a product of saying, you know, what if we had a little more drama to, let's do this, let's get them side by side. What if for the school administrators, add a little more drama to this and really change the architecture of getting a little bit more of the, shall we say, East Coast character to it, and some shed systems and some skylight work and a lot more illumination into the entryway instead of being so static through the door and into a dark hallway, whatever it might be. Notice how there's a whole variation change on getting this whole thing to open up. Very flat entryway here, really pulling it all forward. A lot of glass atrium piece on top, even in some of the assembly areas here, glass and again, and a little bit of a walkway, and this would be an interesting little green space outside the actual form itself to kind of allow the students to go in there maybe at lunch break, but the rest of the building is on this end that I didn't include. So that's another variation on the theme as a result of seeing some things happen that are a little bit more intriguing. There's another little elevation where it really begins to open up and add more of almost like an East Coast provincial look to it. An almost very barn type or almost old colonial look to it. I just kept moving around the whole empire in terms of what if it looks like this? And that's one of the things that I really love to do when I go through a design process. I don't fall in love with any little, just change a little line here. I really adjust and really open things up, come back and compress it, then expand it and then compress it for the benefit of seeing some things that might change here. This is the elevation, or pardon me, plan view of what this might look like. And putting a bit of scale to it with people, and again, multiple buildings behind it. Again, variation in theme, all about variation in theme, giving your client a lot to work with and a lot to see in terms of developing the shapes and surfaces you're working with. So again, let's go back into this. Next one was a little bit more of a thumbnail. Go back to let's go back to this. Once you start to see this for a moment, what I did here was begin to take advantage of that very static, almost public-private school look to it. And, oops, let me move this out of the way so it's kind of, so we see them here a little bit better. There we are. That public-private school look to it, for example, into more of a contemporary, very avant-garde entryway piece. Here's the entryway, the rest of the building. All this is happening ahead of that plan view drawing that we were given initially. By the way, we were given lots of drawings, but they really want to focus on an entryway to begin with. As we go through the process here, you'll see how it all began to shift, and I'm doing different building variations that would help them see and justify what they wanted to do. Again, a little bit of an plan view study, taking that plan form and putting it in perspective. What does it look like when you begin to generate that elevation or that plan view into a perspective study? Really quick, really fast little thumbnail sketches. While I'm at it here, each one of these sketches take about maybe, I'd say no more than 5 to 10 minutes piece. Just really cranking through them and providing their client base with a lot to think about and a lot to really discuss in terms of which way do we want to take this this format here. Let's move along here. Go back again. Yeah, let's keep this up. Once I came back, after completing this one, let's go back to a couple of sketches here. I went back to this basic theme and tried to develop something around this cupola piece into a much more of a contemporary, kind of flatten it down a little bit, entryway, elevation study to kind of show you what that bell tower might look like. And another variation on theme here. Oops, sorry, let's get this all lined up here. Is that helping? There you go. Got to make sure I get those sketches lined up. So that was a product of, let's see, where am I here? There, let's get rid of those guys. This is another variation on that same theme, trying to look at different ways of putting in little features like glass, time, a clock tower, entryway pieces, a lot of paving systems and change of materials on the ground plane to work with it here. Now let's move along here. Next is again, going back to basic, just looking at the entryway. Let's go back to that first sketch again. Went right back to the rhythm of, and the stead setup of what this portion here began to look like. I came right back to it and said, all right, let's slow it all down a little bit, and right back into some basic little studies here for simply the entryway. Maybe it's just a simple adding of a wall, a little bit of glass to it, and then just change the character, and it would look like that perspective would look like this, up over the top, more of a bird's eye view. This is what that's going to look like. And then again, back to an elevation. A little different than this one, but again, 3 different themes on the same basic overall look. Kind of confine that and focus in on that basic entryway piece, and that's it. So let's move again here. Now, taking the building into account, maybe we go both ends. Maybe we actually put an entry here, and a little bit of an administration wing in front of that. This is what that would look like from another perspective coming into the building itself. It would be more centered and in here, for example, and then we'd actually pull this portion here, this upper level on behind it. My go-to quickly here, gang, is this pace okay? Is this making sense for us? Hopefully. What do you think, Victoria? Good? Again, a lot of variations, a lot of theme, a lot of change, and a lot of thinking process going through the development here. So I want to slow it all down. Hope I'm not going too quick here to kind of destroy the pattern here that we're working with as we go through it. So everything good? Super. You always fly through this, but I hope it makes sense, Shadow. I just want to make sure that we kind of can communicate the principle. The principle behind it all this is to take a basic element and begin to magnify it into another atmosphere or another dimension altogether. That doesn't mean you're going to win all the time, but at least you're giving your client a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to really weigh in terms of, oh, we could do this, or we could. That's far more productive. Gee, I don't like that. How come you did that? Or else complete silence from them. As I said earlier in the stream, one of the great signatures of knowing that you've made a great presentation is your silence. Your work does your speaking for you. That's the key. So let me move along here. Again, another variation on entryway. Another variation again on entryway. How to begin? Look at the plan view. Kind of neat where you've got this translucent glass with these very dark darts come into it, with maybe they're illuminated at night or whatever. That might look like that, and a little bit of perspective. And it also could look like this, where it's more of a curve to it, and a little more graphic fiber optic piece on the inside of that. And then again, different variations on there. Add a little bit of scale, and again into the entry, far more character. Welcome to this place, as opposed to, oh geez, I'm entering the building. I don't want to do so. Gives it a lot more personality. So let's move along here. Then let's switch back from this. This is an interesting transition here. During the conversation with all the administrators, all of a sudden, one individual came up with the idea of saying, you know what, we kind of need to go back to almost like a Westminster look, or a British private academy look. And these next family of sketches begin to kind of telegraph that with a typical tower. Again, with some very simple courtyard pieces around it and different variations on theme. Very simplified, low-key piece to kind of put it all together. So these next family of sketches go much more to the very traditional private school, almost European, United Kingdom approach and European approach to academic environments here. Notice here, very simple, straightforward. It's not the entry. This is one of the features of the building that we're looking at and putting it all together. So there's one. Then I moved into this, put it into perspective. Notice again, a lot more of a campus piece. The entryway was not being featured here. This again would eventually be the other side of this piece itself. Could be underneath here. But again, an elevation, looking at this wall, so to speak, just changing the speed and the tempo of the sketches to get it all put together. Very quick little rapid sketches based on this Westminster or this Abbey look to this the school foundation that the one individual and the board member was looking at for us to evaluate. Again, a little thumbnail study here. Very traditional piece, the shed roof, in addition to some Westminster, the tower pieces, etc. And modules for learning modules, again, much more captive. Family of sketches, that's what that was all about. And again, back to more traditional again, a little bit more double shed, where it actually it really mirrors itself, but it has a bit of an interruption here with this. This could be a clock tower, it could be a bell tower, whatever that need might be. But again, another sufficient to say, another variation on theme here to kind of give them what they're looking for in terms of the final aspect of what they're going to develop. So I went from that variation into, so let's go back and do a little more damage. So I turned the corner a little bit on that with this UK private school, and got back into some really interesting just elevation studies on elevation with a lot more organic look to it. Again, back to shed, and then again, putting that into perspective just a little bit. what that might look like for that entryway. And again, this would be another building, for example. Now we're moved into an area here, pardon me for not injecting this earlier. We were moving into this area now where all of a sudden they began to see that the entryway could really be an entry piece or a signature piece for a whole new piece of architecture. There'd be a separate campus in the building. So these studies that you'll see now are beginning to move away from that initial building plan form and look at other facilities on the campus that they could build into. So that's another away from it. Now we back to traditional again, where it was very interesting how, again, the plan view, a little bit of a perspective study, keeping it very simple, but very much straightforward and much more purely academic, far more Frank Lloyd Wright like straightforward, low profile building. And again, entryway, kind of a little bit of a plan view shift. This perspective kind of reflects what that is doing, and very simple forms that put it all together here. So super interesting things, and again, notice the latitude from start to finish as we begin to wind down this, how that just moved and morphed from one dimension to another and changed an awful lot, which I think was really, to be very intriguing. So there was one study. And again, a little more again, flamboyant in terms of dual entryway pieces, adding a little administration building up front, looking at elevation of it, a plan view of what happens up front with this boulevard or this entryway here, and making that a little bit more unique in terms of getting back to that sedated, almost straightforward, contemporary look at that they wanted to go back to from one of the theme studies here. And the last study we did was something that was pretty close to where it all ended up. It was a combination of a lot of different elements here. And this is, again, this is the entryway piece, a new wing added here, another wing element here. And this turned out to become one of the mainstays of putting a whole new different campus on the site that would go back to, let me just do this for a moment here. Before I leave here, just for a moment, anybody, any questions or concerns so far? Just hopefully clarifying some concepts and ideas that we're talking about here as far as this whole idea of architectural project studies. I've entitled the stream today a project study because, and project based, because it really was something that I wanted to start with, how to explain how to start some architectural studies for those who are in architecture, if you have a struggle putting it into real time or converting the elevation to plan view and vice versa, or perspective. That first piece I did about introducing the modular series and thinking in the third dimension hopefully would help you there. But let me stop for a moment here, and I think it's really unique that putting this stuff into practice over the years for me, my career has been incredibly helpful. I don't stop. I never stop. I never hesitate. I just keep going through it all, knowing full well that we're going to hit some and we're going to miss some, and we're not going to win it all the time. But it really makes a huge difference. To a bunch of, you're right, Shadow. I think I'm going to go back in, for example, this coming Thursday from the architectural side here of project-based materials. I'm going to show you the same thinking process, hopefully again, in some landscape architecture that was done very recently as well. It all ties together. It doesn't matter if it's architecture, landscape architecture, product design. It's infinite. You use this whole tool all the way through your development process, and I think the more you expand on it, and the more you interface with different developments, for example, architecture, product, transportation, interior space work, it all relates, and I think it all comes back to good, fundamental, basic, sound thinking, and that's what these sketches are. Demetrius knows this from my classes at the CCAD. Drawing to me is a thinking process. It's not a visual process, it's a verbal process. So you begin to think in terms of the verbal side. What is it? What's its character? Is it supple? Is it sheer? Is it organic? Is it dramatic? Is it very subtle? Those things begin to tell you certain things about the actual pieces that we're dealing with, and it's a tremendous clue to help build credibility when you put your sketches into action. So anybody, any comment here in closing here? I'm going to wrap it up here in just a moment, but I really thank you for taking the time to be with me. What do you think, Demetrius? Has it been helpful? Victoria, you still with me? Good stuff, gang. I mean, I really appreciate the interface here. It's good to have a conversation going on the list like this because it kind of keeps things alive and helps me to kind of focus on what we have to take care of from sketch to sketch and what we want to highlight, what we want to eliminate. So all that to say, gang, really great to have you on board here today. I think it was just terrific to put it all together. And again, I think let's go back to that sketch I did here. Let's go back to this study just for a moment. Let's wrap that school project up. That was it. All of that came out of, just think of it, all of that came out of focusing in on, pardon me for a moment here, all that came out of that focus area right there. The entry was the problem when I was brought on board. From the entry, we did through a variation of themes, hundreds of sketches that began to open up, and lo and behold, when it all ended up, it became a whole new campus that they saw the architecture begin to blossom with, and they had a bunch of them to work with. And while I'm at it, in closing here with this particular project, when all the sketches were done, I was really honored to know that all my sketches and some of the final studies we did for that project went to the architect, and the architect got in touch with me and said, "This is great stuff," helping us to see this thing and help us build it. So I joined forces with them for a little bit to kind of do some consulting work with them to clarify the images that they were seeing that the board members finally elected as the final design solution. So with that in thought in mind, let's go back to this one just for a moment. This is where I started. And I want to just, again, remind us about how really critical this is. This is how we began the whole process. See the elevation, no perspective, but it also has clues in it. It has modules, has scale, has different building blocks about how to develop the form. Once you begin to see that, let me just show you what I mean by that really quickly here, and we'll wrap it up. Once you see this, let's do this, an elevation. Now, once you see this, maybe it's this, to this, to this. Then all of a sudden, that's a very round form that does this. And it's extremely, maybe it's just as simple as that. Maybe this thing comes through and does that. But at the same time, it all leads like so. Now, we have no clue about what that thing is doing, right? But here's the key. Let's go back again. Let's go back and do this. Take this and this. I'm going to develop a platform here. I'm going to just go to ground base. There it is right there. There's my platform right there. Notice where that thing's sitting. It sits right about here, right? So I'm going to take that whole thing, and I'm going to come down now. I'm going to build this thing up. Now, that's a pivot point right there. From there, notice how that goes like so. That does this. And then again, we've got that. Let's put this in place here. Let's just build that in. Now, notice that comes through, and then it goes right, and then does this. And again, I'm going to run out of space here a little bit. Let's just take that point of reference. Now let's just take this and be a little bolder with it. Maybe that's this. Now it does this. That stands free of that building. Now it comes up. Notice the incline. It's now that. Every one of those things are right there are developed on the understanding of what circles and perspective do. But it's just phenomenal. Now let's go back and pick up the width here. Here's the width of the building. Let's bring that up. Bring that through and begin to slide that shape right through it, mirror that form right through there, and then we're going to run out of paper. So pardon me here, gang. So I'll abbreviate, cheat the system here just a bit to this. Let's go back and get this. Now let's come back to ground. Let's get this line to work. Let's get that line to work. Let's take that through. And notice that had a bit of a reverse to it. That whole thing, that little slope comes back and does this. Let's do a little variation on theme here too. Let's come back and go back to normal here. So let's bring that up. Notice how that sits about right there, which is right about there. It's going to come back to here and give me that. Now let's go back in here. Just change the slope of this. Center line. Let's break up the shape. Let's put some glass in this thing. Let's get back to ground base. So the mistake here, a little accident. Let's make it work for us. Glass. I'll stop right there. I mean, look how that piece began. That simple little elevation. Just turn it around a little bit here. There we are here. Let's go back to this. And the ground base. Taking that same thing and looking at the key points, that point to that point, which gave us that and that. And we began to develop that cylinder off of that shape. This is what Marco Nobili was talking about years ago in my architectural running program. The guy was an absolute genius. He was a visionary. He was a great technician and extremely accomplished. I mean, he, as I said, was the principal architect. He was Italian-based, born in Milano, and Italian-based, and became very prominent and extremely famous in his country. And he was contracted by the House of Garibaldi, which is Monaco, Prince Renier, to do all the work on the palace and things in Monaco are all his architectural work. Phenomenal talent. So, but his whole forte was, in closing, was simply this: when you begin to see an elevation, think in terms of modules. 1, 2, 1, 2. Now open that module up, pick up target points, and begin to see the platform. The platform may do this, so we understand what we're after here. Platform meaning this. This is what the thing that from there to there or there is. This the platform. It's the perspective key. This is the ground base right here. It's there to there. That's where it all started. And from that, you begin to pick up that whole idea, this whole concept of this platform, build it up from the ground on up. That's the whole idea. It's interesting how it all comes together, how this whole process, if we think in terms of, let me break it down as best I can here. If we think in fundamentals, elevation, platform, key points, module, third dimension, visualize, complete. It all fits together. And I think that's the thing I want to stress here with this this whole process today, entitling it the Architectural Project Studies Project Base. How did it start? Here's the story. There we are. Really appreciate the patience here, gang, and very kind commentary, Shadow. Thank you very much. It's a history side of this whole thing. And I'll say this, I've said this all my days, and Demetrius can back this up. And you as well, Shadow, you as well. All of you can really verify this. I am grateful over the course of time for the people I've met along the way who've been incredibly powerful people in my career, small as it is. People like Shadow, Demetrius Influence, and Victoria's Commentary, instructor Sid Mead, Marco Nobili, Homer Legat. I mean, endless number of individuals that I've just had the pleasure of knowing and working with that are absolutely phenomenal talents. Not forgotten that, and I've not forgotten their lesson. And the greatest lesson they taught me was this. Very simply this. I'm not going to take this back, and I mean it with every ounce of my soul that I possess. The greatest lesson I learned was, number one, always respect other people's opinions and points of view. You might not like them, you might not agree with them, but respect them. Because you know what? You don't know it all. You don't have all the expertise. Others might have something that you could benefit from and really build a fire on. So that's what I love, the interface of conflict in terms of, hey, I think it's well, I don't know why. So that's, to me, the great drama about what the design process does. And it begins to develop your story, and your story gets stronger as a result of being able to take the bullets and the acclaim from people that love you. So all the best, gang. Thanks so much for your time here today. It's been a real pleasure. I just want to make one last comment here. We're still working on trying to get this store put together. So I keep announcing this every time I'm on the stream about, hey, go to the website and look at Dr. Contrast Apparel. I think we might be coming on board here. We've got the shirts photographed. We're trying to get those loaded in now. We had to change the format on the website. We're on a number of things. You're right, Shadow. A lot of different things. So all that's coming, folks. So stay with us and stay tuned here today. And if you have any comments, for example, that you'd like to have me work on, please feel free to drop me a note at my email address at jim@drcontrast.com. Love to hear from you. If you have anything you want me to put on or kind of talk about or else illustrate on the stream program on Twitch, happy to do it, gang. It's terrific to have your interface and to help you along the way, to help you help me a lesson plan, actually. That's really good to have. And secondly, please visit my website at drcontrast.com. You'll find some neat stuff there. There's a good drawing program. As I said, we're adding, Shadow just brought it up here on the Just really interesting. It's been a hectic few months, is right for you especially. But we are looking at, I appreciate it, Victoria. It's always great to have you on board. Great stuff. I appreciate your input. Great stuff, Victoria. Thank you. Wish you and your family all the very best. But visit my website at drcontrast.com and to see what you think in terms of, give me some feedback. What do you think of the website? What are we doing? How can we improve it? I've got a great individual working with me on it. Shadow's been a big force on that, as well as Jimmy Romanowski. Great stuff to work with here, gang. So thank you so much. And I always finish with this because that's really, to me, the essence of why I'm here. Never forget to dare to remember, to dare to be great, because you are. Thanks very much, gang. Have a great day. We'll see you on Thursday.